ownership of their work. I'm Kimberly Moran, Senior Editor at We Are Teachers, and with me tonight is the author of the Big Book of Literacy Tasks, Nancy Akhavan. Welcome, Nancy.
Hi, thank you, Kimberly, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. I was just telling Nancy before we got on that I was so excited to read her book, so I'm so excited to share it. I also want to let you know that Nancy has an article up on We Are Teachers right now, and there will be a link to it in the comments for anyone who wants to click on it. But do that after, so you can share time with us now. Okay, Nancy, let's dig right in.
Okay.
I think we all know the traditional I do, we do, you do model, which I love, by the way, but you shake it up.
Yes.
Can you talk about what you think teachers can be doing to shake it up a little bit?
Well, the reason I think it's important to shake it up is students really need to be doing the work that's in the classroom. They need to own it. They need to be experiencing. They need to be practicing. They need to be doing, just doing the doing. And sometimes in the gradual release of responsibility, when we think of I do, we do, you do, we forget to release, or we don't allow enough time for the release. So when you get to the you do, it's really short, or you're rushing students and they don't have a lot of time to be working on things or working through things themselves, where they're having to think a little bit or persevere a little bit to, or to have enough time to read, to really dig into to a book that they might like. So
okay, hold on 1 second. Let me stop you for 1 second. I want to put the graphic.
Okay.
So everybody can see what that is, because I said we all know what it is, but if you don't, it'll be a good time.
Okay. So here comes the graphic.
Go ahead and talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so you can see on the left-hand side the I do, the middle is the we do, and then on the right-hand side is the you do. And the I do is time for you to model, talk to students about what it is they're going to be doing. You do a lot of modeling here. You show them what it's going to look like. You invite them to think about things that they might be wanting to do with their reading or their writing or books that they're working in. And then in the we do, you collaborate with the students on these invitations that you've given them to get started. And you also might be encouraging students to collaborate together. And then the you do is the release, where you're giving them time to do the actual work. So I'm going to give you an example. So today I was actually in a classroom working with a teacher and her students, and they were working on retelling. It was a first grade classroom, and the teacher did the I do. She modeled how she would retell a story that she had read to the children, and we were working on a circular retelling, which is one of the tasks in the Big Book of Literacy Tasks. And she went through it, modeled how to do it, and then they did it together. So she read another story to the class, and together they collaborated on how to do the retelling. And then she released, students went back to their desks, they had little book bags that they were reading out of, and the children were picking a book they wanted to read out of their book bag, and then they would verbally do the retelling aloud to themselves. If they had a partner, they'd do it, share with their partner, but some of them were just talking out loud to themselves. As first graders, they're going to verbalize, right? But it was so cute to see them go through that thinking process, and they didn't have to be prompted. She didn't have to say, well, what was first, what was next? They were able to prompt themselves and do the thinking themselves.
And I imagine that if you shorten that time a little bit, that kids are more likely to sort of retain that information.
Yes.
So when they go back, they can do it right away. I used to use whisper phones for that, so they would, if they were self-conscious about talking. But I love that idea of shortening that time.
Well, I call it, another way to think about it is to stop everything but the kitchen sink lessons. Because you know that old saying, like you throw in everything but the kitchen sink? Sometimes we do that with our instruction. When we're in the I do phase, we tell them so much, and then we say, oh, don't forget this, and don't forget that, and don't forget this, before we ever release to them. That by the time they're supposed to do something by themselves, they have no idea what it is they were supposed to do, because basically we've thrown in everything but the kitchen sink.
Oh, I totally agree. Yeah. So, I mean, one of the main things I got from this book was that everything you should do should have meaning. Everything that you ask kids to do should have meaning. And so if meaningful tasks are super important, I feel like we have to really understand what that means. What does it mean to give a kid a meaningful task, or what does it mean to you?
Well, The first thing it means is that there's a large body of research out there that tells us that task predicts performance. So what they do with you every single day in the room, with you there to guide them and be the expert coach on the side, is what they're going to be able to do on their own. So tasks that have meaning are tasks where they have some voice, they have some choice, or it's something that's worth thinking about, right? It's not a menial color in some sort of worksheet or copy what the teacher has written. There's no copying. It's them writing their own original writing. It's them reading part of a book and then saying, this is what I think about that book. And not worried that it's exactly what the teacher thought was what they should be thinking about the book, but it's their own original thinking. So meaningful tasks have choice, have voice, and have meaning for the student in some way that they can connect to it. The other important thing is whatever you want them to be able to succeed doing, if it's at a quarter or semester by the end of the year, are the exact things they need to be doing every single day in the classroom. So if you want them to be able to summarize the text, they need to be practicing the summary. They don't need to be copying a summary that you presented to them during a modeling time, if that makes sense.
It makes sense, and I think that I've seen it. I've taught first and second graders, and I've taught middle schoolers. And what I love about your book is that it goes grades K through 8. And
yes,
last night I was up with my 8th grader. He was agonizing over answering questions from his book, and I opened your book and found a spot where it said something I love that you do. Here's what you say to the child,
yes,
or here's what you could say to the child. And I think that's where a lot of teachers, when they're starting this out before, they feel comfortable doing it, that's what they need is like, but how do you say that? And I was able to talk about, like, if you say a character's a certain way, then you need to be able to find that text. And so I was able to look at your book, see what the question, what I could say to my son, ask him the question and have him pull it out. It was amazing. It was
That's exciting.
It was very exciting. So I just
okay.
wanted to say that because I think it's easy to talk about this in terms of younger kids.
Oh, yes.
Your book is so accurate all the way through to 8th grade.
Well, that's why I just was talking about summary, because I think summarizing is a skill that students need to be able to do. It's a life skill. We still have to do that as adults. So it's things that they can practice and middle schoolers can work on. The inside each of the tasks, so there's 75 tasks in the book, and each of them have an instructional playbook, which is like, this is your playbook. Just go and do this. So it's not like a lot of reading where you have to read a lot to figure out what you're going to do. You can literally read it and say it and go. All of the tasks are designed for K-8. If you were working with kindergartners, you would be doing it perhaps whole class, modeling more before you release to students. If you were doing it with middle schoolers, you would be using more complex texts or expecting their writing to be more complex, even though the actual task is the same one that a 4th grade teacher might have been using.
And, we had a couple of questions before you started on Facebook when people knew about the event where they said, would it be okay for high school? And like my experience, because I used to help high schoolers write essays, is that like we forget to go back to some of those important things we did with middle schoolers when we're teaching high schoolers. So I feel like this is such a great reinforcement also for anyone who's working with kids on literacy.
Yeah, and I think it works with adults because when I'm not out in classrooms working with teachers, I'm at a university helping grad students, and I use some of these same tasks with them as they're developing their writing and their projects or their dissertations, so it works. So it would easily work with high school students. You just realize that the text that you're putting in front of them or that you're expecting of them is more complex. So if we have summary writing, kindergartners are going to start with a retelling. A 3rd grader would be doing more of a shortened retelling, a recount, moving to summary. A 6th grader is going to summarize. An 8th grader is going to summarize, but with much more complex text than the 6th grader. And then the 10th grader needs to be able to summarize. But again, the text is growing in complexity with the ideas that are in the text and themes that they need to be bringing together, or the big ideas that they're going to be talking and writing about in their summary.
I love that. So here's what I'm thinking, and that I think lots of people are thinking at home right now is, okay, so if I wanted to start this tomorrow morning in my classroom, what's one thing I could change that would help me see that this is a good path? And then after that, I want you to talk about what the longer term goal is.
Okay. So a short-term thing is every time you are going to teach something, think, what do I want the students to do because I'm going to teach this? And focus on that like it's the ball, right? Keep your eye on the ball. Don't make your eye do so long that you get all caught up in too much upfront teaching, but think, I have to do it in shorter, smaller segments so that I can release to the students and they can practice. I'm perhaps going to take this great big task, this great big activity, and break it down into smaller steps, and I'm going to release to them so that they can work on it. And I think that is the short term. Smaller, break it down, release. Smaller, break it down, release. So the students build efficacy with what they're doing and what they're working on. Like they grow thinking muscles and writing muscles and reading muscles, and they get stronger as learners. I think a long-term thing to think about, it would be like over a month of your instruction, how many bigger tasks are you putting in the children's hands for them to work on long term? It's really important to persevere in texts that are longer, of course, according to the age of the child and the appropriateness of the child. But it's to be reading longer texts, to be writing texts that are longer depending on their age and what's appropriate. So you can think about that. The book is broken into 3 parts. There's a blue section, which are day-to-day tasks.
I'm going to interrupt you for one second. Like, in case people just joined us, we're talking with Nancy Akhavan about giving ownership of learning to students. She wrote this awesome book. It's called The Big Book of Literacy Tasks, and it's just filled with 75 different activities that you can use. And so we're asking Nancy about, like, what are some specific things in the book that work?
Right. So going back to the long-term idea, you can go to the blue section in there and think, what are things that I could do daily where I'm increasing the amount of time I release? The green section would be things I might do weekly. And then there's an orange section in there that are things that I might do once in a while because they're longer, bigger, and more complex. But a good first place to start is, I'm going to teach something tomorrow. What's the student going to do, and how can I release to them sooner? So that way they get more practice time with me right there, coaching them as expert coach, moving them forward with what they can do for themselves.
One of the things I love about this is the idea that once kids get used to this whole concept of, I'm going to tell you something specific and then release you, I think they can let go of some of their anxiety and stress about having to remember all the things that they're supposed to do. Like, he's going to tell me this one thing, or he's going to tell me this one thing, my teacher, and I'm going to go do it. Yeah. And I can be successful with that.
And then it reduces the amount of anxiety they have, and they're not as fearful of trying something because they're not afraid to be wrong. It also helps you nurture a very supportive environment in your classroom where it gives them space to make a mistake, to figure it out, to go back and redo something if needed.
Okay, I want to take this time right now to take some live questions from our audience. So I think one of the questions we have, I think that this question comes from you saying the text should get harder and harder. Mm-hmm. One of our watchers right now is saying, are there any text suggestions for second graders? And I think maybe we'll take that, but not obviously that's going to be up to you. You got to know your learners.
Absolutely, you have to know your learners. Another project I've been working on is I have a whole nonfiction book collection with AKJ Education that lists all sorts of books that are appropriate for each grade level that you can read aloud, right? That's so awesome. AKJ Education, they have a full list of, it's a list of books I put together, so that's a resource for that.
Great. Okay, another question. Can we use this during literacy centers?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The key thing would be to model before you released it to the literacy center. For instance, when I was talking about the retelling that I was working with in the first grade classroom today, we modeled it today, gave the student some time to practice, and then she's going to push that out to her literacy center next week because the children will be able to do it on their own. And for themselves. So it's absolutely something that you can do during literacy centers. Just remember the key is to model, 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 but keep it short and then release to them.
One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot when you're talking about this is the language you use to explain things so that you're consistent. I mean, is that something that you consider, like, when you release them, are you going to use the same language every time? This is the task that we're doing and this is what we're calling it?
Yes. So I think it's really important for students to learn your signals so they know basically the routines that I'm going to be modeling for you first, like in essence doing a mini lesson. Then during that mini lesson, I might be inviting you to collaborate with me. Or I might release and you're going to go work with a partner or you're going to go work independently. But a lot of times I'll tell them, okay, now we're going to go do this on our own. You're going to work on this by yourself. I'm going to be there to support you. Or you're going to go, a great example with the literacy centers is you're going to go do this with a partner in a literacy center and then I will check in on you in a little while because I have to go teach a reading group. So not all the tasks are things that you have to be right there coaching them with. That's just that thinking of the I do, we do, you do model, mixing it up a little bit.
Okay. I was just going to ask you one more thing. Oh, yeah. What about your check-ins? So how do you know when a kid is successful?
So it really depends on what you're going to use the task for. Right? So if you are doing a whole class task and you're staying right with them during the you do portion, in other words, it's not a literacy center, you need to be going around, working with them, nudging them, conferencing with them, and checking that they're not struggling, right? But instead of saying, oh, hey, you got that wrong, or, here's the right answer, you could nudge and say things like, have you thought about this? Or have you considered that? Or why don't you go back and try that one more time? So you're using encouraging coaching language that invites the child to do the thinking and the work for themselves rather than judgmental language that might be saying something that's right or wrong. So getting up and moving around with your students is really vital and critical to that. Now, on the other hand, if you're using it as a literacy center, the children are out working on these things on their own while you're at the reading table. But at the end of your literacy block, you could have students, you could invite some students to share some of the things that they might have worked on in one of the tasks. You could celebrate things that they've worked on. And if you need to, you could also do a little bit of a check when you have a time like after school just to get a judgment feeling for how are we doing with this? Do I need to model again? Because the beauty of it is if they're reading something and writing on their own while you're teaching a reading group, they're doing it by themselves. They're not copying. They're not using your thinking. They're thinking for themselves. They're reading and they're writing. And if you find at the end of the day that you need to model it again, that's okay because they're working at it and it's a work in progress.
I think that is so what we all want as teachers for our kids is to be able to have them be able to do it on their own and not feel that anxiety as a teacher that, we're setting them out, when they have testing or when they have to, show what they can do and they've never really practiced it.
Right.
And I want to thank you so much for sharing your research and your ideas with us.
Can I say one more thing before we sign off?
Please.
My last piece is the kids need to go home more tired than you do as the teacher. And sometimes it's the other way around, but their big brains and little brains need to be working and they need to go home more tired than you.
I oftentimes think if we put their brains to work more, that it's a lot like recess. It should be that they need a balance of both.
Yes.
So thank you so much. To everyone who's watching, don't forget to check out Nancy's article on We Are Teachers for more tips on releasing responsibility and student ownership. The link is in the comments. Be sure to get her book, The Big Book of Literacy Tasks. Trust me when I say you will want this as a resource in your classroom. It is so amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Nancy. I learned so much.
Thank you, Kimberly, for having me, and I appreciate We Are Teachers for hosting tonight.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, take care.